back to the channel, guys. On today's video we are going to be replacing the rear brake hose to the caliper on this Land Rover Range Rover L322. Now the reason I'm replacing this brake hose is I've replaced the caliper on this left rear on this vehicle 2-3 times, and it still seems to have kind of a hanging up brake dragging issue on this side. So it leads me to think it's not the caliper, it's actually the brake line that's causing the issue. That's fairly common, not just on these vehicles, but many other vehicles. So to replace it, it's not very hard. I have the replacement brake hose for this. So the brake hose itself attaches to the caliper here at the bottom. That, I believe, is an 11mm banjo bolt, so we will need to loosen that up. And if you follow that line, I actually have a pinch tool holding the line, so once I loosen that up, we're not going to be leaking brake fluid all over the place. So if you follow this line, the other end of this line comes through the control arm here, loops around the rear shock, and it's actually bolted in here to the metal line that's behind this. So we will need to loosen up this connection here, remove this complete hose from this caliper, and replace it with the new caliper. I am also going to be replacing this caliper along with it. That's usually a good idea. If you got an issue on one side, you want to do the caliper and the hose. To remove this caliper is going to be super easy. Our new caliper is going to come with the bracket, so there's no reason to separate the bracket and the caliper. We're just going to loosen up these two bolts here that's holding the bracket and the caliper assembly together. These are 16mm bolts, so we'll go ahead and get those loose. We'll break this banjo bolt loose at the bottom of the brake line here. We'll separate the line and completely remove the bracket and the caliper. Here I have the banjo bolt off from the caliper. Now keep in mind there are two washers, one on each end of this, copper washer seals on this banjo bolt. Now if you're getting a new caliper, that will most likely come with the new bolt and the copper seals, but you want to hang on to it just in case it does not. Now that we have the brake line loose from the caliper, we can go ahead and remove the caliper by removing these 16mm bolts in the back, and we'll remove this caliper and bracket out of the way. So with these 16mm bolts off, I was able to pull the caliper off with the bracket and the pads all as one piece. I will also be replacing the rotor on this side. It's a good idea since it's been kind of seasoned up. They overheat, warp, so it's a good idea to just replace them. Now we can go ahead and start dismounting our line. There is a bolt here that's holding it. There's also one up here through this bracket that holds it, and then we'll get this joint undone here to remove that hose from the vehicle. There is a 7mm bolt here that we will have to remove. There's also a 7mm bolt here that's holding the line. We will also be removing that. Both of those 7mm bolts are removed. The line is free to move. We can also just fish it out of here, removing it from behind the shock. Remember, these are just hold-on brackets. Once you have the bolt off, the back end of it will flip and it'll come off of the line. And we can actually put that on our new line, and that's what will hold it to the vehicle. So now that we have that done, we can go ahead and separate the brake hose from the metal line that's coming in. That's an 11mm line nut that's on the other side. So we'll go ahead and loosen that up and separate both of these lines. There is a clip on the other end that holds it. We will also need to remove that once we have the line off, so we can completely remove the hose. So here I have our brake hose removed from the steel line that's coming in, and this is a clip that's behind it. Guess you don't need to remove it. That just sits in the back and keeps the two together. Now I'll put a rubber cap on here, otherwise it's going to continue to leak brake fluid until we have the line on. So I have a rubber cap on here holding the fluid in. Now we can go ahead and completely remove this line from the vehicle. just like so. Here I have a replacement line. You want to make sure they're somewhat identical and they're going to fit. Make sure the ends are same. Now we'll go ahead and remove these plastic brackets off our original and place them on to our new line. Then we'll get that back into the vehicle. I have the line in position and our hold-on brackets tightened up. One here again and at the bottom. So it's in position. We'll go ahead and put our pinch tool on this one. Since I don't have the caliper on yet. And on this end, we'll go ahead and position this back in. It will fit through this star-shaped bracket that's on here. Just like so. And we'll go ahead and thread the other line onto this. Tighten that up and then we'll get the caliper on. Or you can do the caliper before. It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to pinch it off, otherwise it will fill with fluid and I'll have fluid leaking here. So we have the line here all tightened up. It does help to hold this square end with an 18mm wrench as you're fully trying to tighten this. Again, 18mm wrench on this side to hold while you're tightening the other side does help. Now the brake line's in position. It's not binding on anything, not hitting anything. Now we can go ahead and put our new caliper on. Our new caliper mounted into position, all tightened up. Now our new caliper did come with the new banjo bolt and the copper seals. So now we can go ahead and put our line into position and mount that onto the caliper. Banjo bolt basically will have two washers. One will go just like that and the other will go on the other end and that'll tighten right up into the caliper. The banjo bolt tightened up, the line is secured. Now we can go ahead and remove our pinch tool, pinching the line. That'll allow the caliper to fill up with fluid. So we'll give that a few minutes before we bleed the system, which is a must. To bleed the system, if you look at the top of the caliper, right above your hose, you will see a bleeder screw. The bleeder screw will normally have a rubber cap on it, kind of like that. So we'll have to remove that. So that bleeder screw on this is an 11mm. We'll go ahead and loosen it. And we will put the rubber hose over it. And I got a clear vinyl hose connected to that and a container at the bottom for fluid to come through. So we will open up the hood. We will also open the cap on the master cylinder reservoir. And what that allows it to do is this is called gravity bleeding. Eventually the caliper will fill up with fluid and start coming out of the bleeder screw. And you might see some bubbles coming through. It might take a few minutes for the calipers to fill up before it can start leaking through the bleeder screw. So we'll give it a minute. After a couple minutes of waiting, you can see the fluid starting to drip. We'll let that drip for a little bit. Let the air come out of that. Then we'll close the bleeder screw. And then we'll pump the pedal and see how it feels. And we can repeat this process a few times to get all the air out of the system. So I went ahead and closed the bleeder screw. We'll put the cap back on the master cylinder. We'll pump the pedal and see how it feels. Then we'll repeat the bleeding process one more time to make sure we get all the air out of the system. Bleeding it about 3 times. The pedal feels good. There's no air coming out of the system. So we went ahead and tightened up the bleeder screw. We got the dust cap back on there. Everything's nice and tidied up. You want to double check the level on the master cylinder. Now we're going to get the wheel back on. We'll take the vehicle for a test drive. Make sure there's no issues, leaks, noises.